Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And today we're going to be talking about Dune Messiah, Frank Herbert's sequel to the original novel Dune, his science fiction masterpiece Dune. Dune Messiah came out in 1969. It was originally serialized in Galaxy magazine, I think. I think it was Galaxy magazine. It was serialized in that magazine before it was printed as the novel, Dune Messiah. A much shorter novel than Dune was. Noticeably shorter. It's the shortest book in the series that Frank Herbert wrote about Arrakis. I'm going to assume you're familiar, at least with the original novel Dune, where Paul Atreides, of the House Atreides, his family arrives on Dune, the planet Arrakis, to take over the spice production. Spice, which is necessary for space flight and navigation. But his family is brutally murdered by the House Harkonnen. And Paul takes refuge with the natives of the planet, the Fremen. Now, Paul's bloodline has been manipulated. He actually has been bred to have, well, superpowers, basically. He can see the future, Paul can. And the Bene Gesserits have bred him to be this kind of super being. And so he becomes the Messiah figure for the Fremen. By the end of the novel, not only has Paul defeated the bad guys, the House Harkonnen, but he has taken over the universe. He is now the most powerful man in the universe, Paul is. And Dune, you could mistake Dune for being just a science fiction adventure story, and many have. Because it has a lot of science fiction adventure story tropes in it. But while it's using these tropes, it's subverting these tropes. But the first novel does it in a very subtle way. And sometimes it's a bit too subtle. But Dune Messiah makes all that stuff very clear. And I think Dune Messiah, when I read it, I felt like, I kind of felt like this should have been part of the original novel Dune. I think if Dune Messiah was in and a part of Dune, Dune would have been a better book. Because it's a necessary part of Paul Atreides' story. And while he is the hero of the novel Dune, Dune Messiah, the novel, makes very clear that Paul Atreides is not a hero. As Paul Atreides is very aware. He's very aware that he is not a hero. He is the Messiah figure, the Messiah for the Fremen, but he's a manufactured Messiah. He was basically bred into a being who could take this position, the position of Messiah for the Fremen. And at the beginning of Dune Messiah, it's interesting because Paul Atreides is the most powerful man in the universe. And so, he's reached the pinnacle. He's in control. He's not a happy man, Paul, though, because there's a lot going on at the beginning of this book. Paul Atreides, he's not doing what everybody expects a certain thing from him, whether you're the Bene Gesserits, the people of Arrakis, the Fremen. They all expect certain things from him depending on how they view him. And he's not going along entirely with that. He will not be controlled by the Bene Gesserit. And he's not doing everything in the way the Fremen or certain members of the Fremen want him to do things. he's not always doing what's expected of that type of character. And so there are plots against him. The Bene Gesserit are plotting against him. You have other people plotting against him. Even members of the Fremen are plotting against him. All for their own reasons. So his position isn't as secure as it might seem. And more importantly, he's a bit bitter at this point. This takes place 12 years after Dune, so he's an older man at this point. He's much older than the young guy he was in Dune. He's a bit hardened, and he has bitterness and regret about the things that he has brought to the universe. Because he was the Messiah for the Fremen, he has caused a religious jihad to spread throughout the galaxy. Billions of people have died in this religious jihad throughout the galaxy. And he was not able to find any way around it. Paul Atreides can see the future. He can see different timelines in the future. That's his power. But he cannot, despite his power, he can't find a way to get around this situation. No matter what he does, even if he just kills himself, it'll still happen. Things are already set in motion for this specific thing to happen, and he can't get around it. And he's bitter about this, understandably. And he recognizes that he is not a heroic character at all. In fact, at one point, he compares himself to Hitler. One of the few times where the Dune series calls back to actual human history. He compares himself to Hitler, but he points out that he's even worse. He's even worse than Hitler because he has caused many, many, many more deaths than Hitler ever did. And so you have a guy who's comparing himself to Hitler. You could see he's not a hero. And that was just something he can't, or he couldn't find his way around. And even at this point in his life, he feels himself kind of trapped in his existence. There aren't a lot of good choices for him as far as ending the jihad and moving the future into one of peace. At least one where he can actually exist and be happy. He isn't completely. He is in a arranged marriage. He's with somebody else, but he's also has this arranged marriage for political reasons, which he's unhappy about. And he can't see any way into the future where he can just exist and not have billions of people dying all the time. And eventually something really, really ghastly and terrible happens, and I can't tell you what that is. If you've read the book, you know. If you haven't read the book, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But it causes even more unease among the Fremen, that's for sure. And it is pretty creepy. It's a creepy situation that's going on towards the end of this book. It really is. And so Paul's choices seem even more limited. And eventually, he does find the one way, the one pathway into the future, the least destructive and most humane pathway that he can move forward into. But is this good for him? Or is he going to have to make a tremendous sacrifice? It's a really good ending to the Dune story. A lot of people are not happy with it because I think it's if you're under the illusion that Paul is, this great hero from the first book, this shatters those illusions certainly. And his fate is not one perhaps that we would hope for a character that we care about. It's a very adult and sophisticated conclusion to Paul's story. It's a really interesting one, and I find it a satisfying one. It is not, of course, the end of the Dune saga. This story continues directly into Children of Dune, about the heirs of Paul Atreides. But as far as Paul's story, the central character of the first novel, it's a very satisfying conclusion, I think. It's one of those books that make you think, gives you a lot to think about, just because of Paul and his situation. There's a lot of cool science fiction stuff going on in the book. It's not filled with action, but there are a lot of interesting characters, a lot of interesting situations, a lot of creative stuff in this book. And so it's entertaining and interesting and short, much shorter than the first book. But I do recommend it. I recommend it highly. I think, like I said, this and Dune, for me, form one story, the story of Paul. And it's a satisfying story. I think Dune is a better book because of this sequel. And I don't think I could really say anything other than that. So that's all I have to say about this particular book at this particular time. Dune Messiah, check it out if you haven't already. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.